Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. And today we will be reviewing the new movie from A24, Men. Today is going to be a special movie review because we do have a guest joining us. I'm super stoked to introduce Stephen Foxworthy.
Hi, hello everyone. Katie, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Ready to talk about this absolutely bug nuts movie. How about
Yeah,
you?
I'm super stoked to have you here. And what do you do? How do we know each other?
Once upon a time, I taught high school, and you were one of my unlucky students.
Child. Anyway, so
I have veered away from that now. I'm no longer a teacher. I took a lateral move as a corporate trainer, so I'm still teaching, just in a different capacity. But I'm actually the host of a podcast called the Disenfranchised Podcast. A buddy of mine, Brett Wright, we discuss movies that were supposed to get the franchise treatment and then didn't. Like, they got one movie and then done. And so we're ramping up to our 100th episode, and yeah, it's exciting. It's a lot of fun. So check us out wherever you get podcasts. Disenfranchised Podcast. We're on social media at Disenfranchised Pod.
So, this movie.
This
Pretty-
movie,
Pretty wild.
yes. I texted you yesterday after I finished my screening, and you had already seen the movie at that point, but I didn't know that. I said, if you haven't seen Men yet, this movie is wild. All caps, spaces between every letter. Like, oh my word, this movie, for like the last 10 minutes, I'm like gripping the sides of my head, just shaking my head, going, I don't know. I don't know.
I didn't want to text you because I didn't want to influence you, but when I was watching it, I took one of my buddies. He was not prepared.
How can one prepare for Alex Garland's Men? How does one prepare for that? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It was funny though, because anyone that I told that I was gonna go watch this, I'd say, yes, I'm gonna go see this horror movie and it's called Men. And they'd be like, is that a joke? Like, are you saying that because it's about men, it's scary? And I was like, I mean, honestly, yes, but it also is a horror film.
Right. It actually is a horror film called Men, but yes, because it is about men, it is also scary.
Yeah.
Both things can be true. We can hold both things in tandem.
I guess what I want to say first is if you haven't seen it, you should see it simply because it's beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
That opening shot with the red in the apartment was, oh god, I loved it.
The way that Garland and his DP, whose name escapes me at the moment. Oh goodness, I'm gonna have to look that up. The way that Garland and his DP managed to use color, particularly the color red, as a motif is really, really incredible. I think they use green a lot as well, because most of this takes place in wooded areas. So like red and green are kind of the color motifs throughout the film, and like green feels so very safe, but every time there's like any red, very intentionally, like none more red on the screen. Anytime there's red, you get like this sense of like foreboding just kind of washes over you, and it's wild, absolutely wild.
I love it when movies do that. Another good example of a movie that just did that so perfectly, La La Land used a lot of color.
And there's a way to do it, I think, that often comes off as very showy, and there's a way to do that that really enhances the story that you're trying to tell. And this one definitely does it in a way that it enhances the story and immerses the audience in the story.
Now, I did not know going into this that it was one actor playing all of the men.
How long did it take you to figure that out?
Well, I started to figure it out when they showed the little boy. Because I was like, oh, that's not right.
That's some Uncanny Valley stuff right there. Like,
I was like, this is
sure.
not right. This is not well.
we should shout out the actor Rory Kinnear, a very talented actor, an actor I've loved for a number of years, but he's always just he's very he's very there. I watched an interview with him prior to recording this about his process. And usually if he has a character to play, he writes out a full biography for the character and kind of internalizes a lot of that. Well, he had to do that for like the 9 or so different characters that he plays in this movie. which meant probably a lot of work for him, but it comes through in the performance, like, because each of those performances is like a very real thing, and you absolutely do not doubt for a second, with the exception of the kid, because there is some uncanny valley stuff going on when he takes that mask off, and you're like, ooh, that looks weird. That's a grown man's face. I started to put it together when the vicar came on, because I'm like, that's the same guy. And then it really crystallized when she goes into the pub, and then it's literally everybody around the room is just Rory Kinnear in like a different wig.
It was like chilling. I feel like that would be the word that I would use like to describe the movie overall, especially as a young woman. Every time something would happen, I'm like, I understand the fear, even if I haven't been through those exact situations. It's like everything that she's kind of going through, it's like most women have felt that at some point, and that's like terrifying. Whereas
me, as the cishet white dude, I'm watching this going, oh, has there ever been a time when I've put a woman in that position? And so I'm starting to like reflect on my own behaviors and my own kind of idiosyncrasies, or my own habits or behaviors, such as they are, to try to what in here am I guilty of? Because surely something, right? I mean, the fact that you have one actor playing all these different characters is pretty much just your way of saying all men. Really, because it's one guy is literally every man in this, with the exception of one, every man in this film. So that reminds me of like this quote that I was reading in the LA Times that Alex Garland said, and he said most people just watch a film and they just kind of shrug and send an email or go get a beer or whatever, but if anyone is provoked by this film, hopefully they can query on the provocation. So I like that this movie really did like make people think and like self-reflect, and even if people like saw different things from it, it really is kind of a slap to the face. This is a very polarizing film if the Letterboxd response is any indication whatsoever.
And the cinema score, I believe it got a D+.
Not surprising at all. Considering the kind of stuff that gets A's, not surprised by that at all. And this is something else that I caught in another interview with Alex Garland. He says, he basically said he wants his films to read like an audience participation piece. Like he wants the audience to participate. So he's not going to spell everything out. He's not going to make it very clear, which is why the ending, you're sitting there going, wait, huh?
I had to do homework.
I mean, and honestly, if you sit through any of Garland's film, I don't know how familiar you are with the rest of his oeuvre, but like if you sit through any of his films, like they all kind of leave you with that sense of, oh, by the end of it. I would say his clearest film is probably Ex Machina, but I would also say that's maybe his best film. I'm not saying that the clarity makes the film better, but I think he has backed off a little bit since then to try to make the work a little more, to force people to engage with it. Because really, as an artist, that's all you really want, right? Is for someone to engage with your work. And he's almost like a modern day David Lynch in that respect.
I thought it was so cool. It was nice to see it with someone as well and to like discuss. And he saw it differently than I did.
I can't imagine.
Yeah. we were talking about it, and he was like, well, this is how I saw it. And I was like, that is not what I got. As a woman and someone who grew up very religious, I mean, all of the little religious themes.
The religious stuff is what hit me the hardest, coming as someone who not only grew up religious, but actually taught religion for a number of years, for over a decade. It very much kind of stands out.
So we can actually dive into talk about each of the guys and what we think they represent.
Talk about the men of men.
Yeah, let's talk about the men of men. So how do we feel about James, the husband?
I'm of two minds on James.
Yeah.
Part of James's character and his arc hits true for me at the point where I am in the moment. I think the way he handles things are egregious and terrible, and I think he's absolutely abhorrent, but the pain that he's going through, I felt that. While I think I relate to his pain, I do not relate to his response and the way that he reacts to that pain, because again, I say again, like I've said this before, he reacts to that pain by inflicting pain, which is, I think, a cycle of abuse that I think this movie is addressing. Not to kind of spoil some of my thoughts on it, but I think this movie is about perpetuating cycles of abuse that the patriarchy has inflicted upon women. And I think James is very much emblematic of that. I don't like James. I think the actor that plays him is phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Because he is not afraid to let me hate him. And I don't think the actor shows much sympathy for the character, but that doesn't make the performance any less believable either.
I think all of the performances were beautiful, even if they were horrific. I agree with that. I also think, I mean, there's gonna be spoilers in this.
We probably should have said that up top. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll write it in the title. But
there you go.
Not only do I think that like James represents that cycle of abuse really well, but I mean, he dies. I think it shows that not only it's really hurting women, but I mean, it kills him. So many people are like, well, it's hurting women, but like it is equally hurting men, just in a different way.
That's a very good point, yeah.
So I thought that was really cool to see him represent that, because ultimately, yeah, his mistreatment of his wife and how he handled his pain is, I mean, that was his demise. So,
literally, in his case, yeah.
He was such a fascinating character, even though we didn't see the most of him. The fact that he was still kind of the core of everything.
Yeah, he's right at the heart of it. He's the first man that we see in the film and the last. So I think that's important. None of the characters are not intriguing, so I'm probably gonna have something to say about all of them.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have little bullet points on each of them.
You're so organized. I have nothing but my brain. I'm just sitting here like, okay, we're just gonna talk,
forgetful.
right? I don't need to prep anything.
Yeah, I'm just the most forgetful person like ever, so I need to have it written down, otherwise I'm just not going to talk about it.
Fair enough.
Now the next man that we really get to interact with is Jeffrey. How do we feel about Jeffrey?
First of all, like, and this is something I try to go into Alex Garland movies with as open a mind as I possibly can. It's the same way I go into a David Lynch movie. Like, I don't really want it to make sense. I'm just going to let the movie happen in front of me. And then how I feel about it is how I feel about it. And usually that means I'm going to have a pretty good time, because I can just like surrender myself to the art and let it happen. So for particularly the opening scenes of this movie, I'm on edge constantly because I don't know what kind of movie this is. Like, I don't know where the threat is. So I'm like gripping the sides of my chair for the entire like first half hour of this movie, kind of slowly waiting for the threat to reveal himself. And Jeffrey is kind of the first wisp, the first hint of that threat that we get. Ultimately, he's probably my favorite of the men in Men, just by virtue of the fact that he's not completely awful. I mean, he is, but not at first.
I think he represents the majority of men. I feel like.
Or at the very least, like the sympathetic men, the ally men, as it were. He seems very sympathetic to her plight, but he still doesn't really believe her either. Like, you still get this kind of like, is he gaslighting her kind of thing? And then the scene at the end with the car, he's right there with the rest of them. Like, he's no better, no worse than any other man that she's encountered so far in this film. And it's a little frustrating, but also you can absolutely see it coming. The title of the movie is Men, after all. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I remember seeing the trailer and the movie poster, and he's the face on the poster. So I was like, when I first saw him, I was like, well, he's gotta be like the bad guy of this movie. And he seems a little off, but overall, continues on. It's like, well, he's really not that bad. And then the movie ends and I'm thinking about it, and I drop my friend off at home and I'm alone, and I'm like, I just said he's not that bad. He is like the epitome of like, but I'm a nice guy.
Right.
But there are like little hints. His like joke at the beginning, like you mentioned, and then even the insisting on carrying in all her stuff, which at first you're just like, okay, that's polite, whatever. And then at the bar, he insists on paying for her drink, even though she says no like 3 or 4 times.
Multiple times, right.
And she only ends up giving up because the bartender is like, well, I'm not going to take your money or whatever.
Right.
And it's like, that could all be seen as polite, but it's also the underlying, like, even though you might be trying to be nice, you are undermining her saying no.
You're shutting her voice down. Like, you are essentially taking away her voice. The insistence early in the, like, within that first scene, oh, well, you signed as Mrs., so where's your husband?
Yeah.
Like, just like if there's a word I could put on Jeffrey, insistence is probably it.
You know, when she does hurt him, I mean, it is terrible that he gets run over by a car, but at the same time, it is a good representation of, like, she no longer is, like, almost of use, or, like, she hurts him, so then he loses it. And that's what can happen with, like, nice guys. Like, I remember being in high school, if someone were to, like, say that they liked me and I was like, sorry, I'm not interested, they'd, like, continue or think that they could, like, wait it out. And it's like, no is no.
There
Just
is no limit to
respect
the
that.
audacity of men. And that's ultimately, I mean, he is the best of them. That's not saying much.
Now the boy, the creepy little boy, the mask.
Samuel, oof. I mean, he's clearly got some sort of, there's something going on with Samuel, and we don't really have any indication of what it is beyond just the vicar saying, oh, he's a deeply troubled little boy. But, you know, the insistence that, well, let's play a game. I want to play a game, so you have to play a game with me. Oh, you don't want to? You're a stupid.
Yeah.
Like, and it's that turn, like the immediate turn. It's, you know, you see examples of men coming on to women online, and as soon as they're like, no, thank you, not interested, even trying to do it nicely, which is far more than most guys deserve, he immediately responds, you're a stupid. Like, I mean, it just instant.
I thought it was cool to watch him, even though he honestly scared the hell out of me.
For good reason, I'd say.
That little blonde mask, I was like, oh, hell no.
The little Marilyn Monroe sugar and spice mask thing that he's wearing. Yeah.
I was like, oh, no. Boys from a young age are often defended with the whole boys will be boys thing, or it's not a big deal because they're little, they'll grow out of it or whatever. But when that behavior is, like, just reinforced or not dealt with, then they grow up to be like the men that we see in Men. And even the vicar, like, writing it off as, oh, he's a deeply troubled boy, even though technically in that little moment the vicar is like, you know, back off, leave her alone, he still just kind of let it happen and didn't try to correct the child, really. That was a really interesting point to see, and I'm glad that they brought a little boy into the mix to show that it starts young.
Right. I mean, and again, it's about the perpetuating cycles. Like, it's about these things repeating. He is kind of the walking embodiment of that idea, is that, you know, this will happen because we're not doing anything on our level to correct it. And who's not doing anything? It's the men. The men are complicit in not doing what they need to do to correct the issue.
We didn't get too much time with him other than those little insults.
And
there
he
was
shows.
The creepy,
Go ahead. Sorry.
With the crow.
Yes. At the end.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I didn't totally get that. Yeah. All it meant to me was that was creepy as hell.
Yep.
A little boy playing with a dead crow? No, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. No, and I mean, it happens to be the crow that, like, had flown into her window earlier. And then he starts, like, taunting her, and she's, like, holding the knife to him, and he just kind of keeps walking towards it, kind of backing her into another part of the house. Like, that's when that character, who's always kind of menacing, just kind of comes into the fold. That's when the movie itself kind of starts to turn and get
Yeah.
really surreal and really bizarre and really weird is in those moments.
I was sitting there and I'm like, man, I'm glad that I am 100% sober while watching this, because sometimes it's fun to do like a little something, anything before a movie and go in, have a good time. That would have scared the hell out of me. I don't think I could have. I think I would have had to walk out, because that was when everything really kicked up.
Yeah, don't
And
watch this
I
movie
was-
stoned, everybody.
I was like clenched just watching it, because it starts like and it's so quiet, that little scratching of the mask and the bird, and then it feels like from that point on she has just continued to get pushed against. And like I was getting sweaty. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, kill him right now, stab him in the face.
I fully expected her to. I really did. I legit thought she was going to, and was a little surprised when she didn't.
All right, the cop, what a scumbag.
No thanks. If ever there was a movie that made me want to say "Hey, cab," maybe this one. That guy's a jerk. Lady cop, I'm a little more fond of. The female officer that assists earlier, that is actually there, like taking her statement. She seems helpful and empathetic. Male cop, not so much. Maybe the antithesis of all that.
So I've just recently also been watching The Wilds on Amazon Prime, which I highly recommend. That show addresses a similar trope in this, which is like the crazy woman who people like doubt, that kind of trope. And I liked how this movie addressed that, how he doesn't believe her. He's like, it's fine, it's not a big deal, almost like you're hysterical, you don't need to worry about it, he's not a threat. And it's like, she's like, no, he is. I'm not safe, and I need you to acknowledge that.
But how often does that happen? Probably not just in England, but everywhere. Like,
oh yeah.
And there's this kind of historical baggage that comes with, women are hysterical, women be crazy. It's kind of this overwhelming shadow that kind of looms over the male perspective. Damagingly so, obviously. I mean, yeah, he seems very emblematic of that. The fact that he doesn't take the time to see why she might be concerned about this at all, like, is also really troubling.
I think it goes to just show that if you are not actively supporting women, then you're ultimately hurting them. If you're not defending minorities or people who are at a disadvantage, then you're kind of hurting them. Like, you're actively hurting them.
You're continuing to perpetuate these self-same cycles. And I mean, of the characters that we've discussed so far, he's probably the one we see the least, but he's the one that ends up getting her out of the house at the end of the movie, because he just shows up and he's outside, but he's an authority figure. Like, he's someone who can be trusted. What's he doing here? And so she comes out of the house because she feels safe. Then we get that super creepy, very eerie lighting change where all the lights, everything goes black, and then the lights come back and he's gone. That happens like several times in those final moments, and it's never not disconcerting every time it happens. Okay.
The naked nature man.
Oh, yeah. Here's the thing about Rory Kinnear. He is not a shy guy. He is naked for so much of this movie.
Yeah. I was like, is this an episode of Euphoria? Are we gonna witness someone snorting crack soon? Like, because they do a lot of that.
Is that what Euphoria is about?
Stranger.
I mean, when you first see him, that character is just menace personified. Like, there's not, I mean, if you call him the nature man, he is the nature of man. And he appears literally out of nowhere. He's just there, fully naked, dick flopping in the wind, such as it is. Yeah. The wind, not the dick. The dick is, it's evident. You can see it. But like, he's just there. And then when she goes back to the house, like after, okay, this is really weird, just moves out. And then you start to see him, like you see him just out of the corner of the frame, just kind of walk past the frame. And you're like, wait. And then like you start to see him more. And it's very clear that he is there and he sees her in the house. That's when your hackles start to like get up. And then every time he appears from then on out, menace, foreboding, fear. because
Mhm.
ultimately you don't know what he wants. Garland is saying, here's what I see. What do you make of this? And that's kind of what, particularly as he appears at the end of the film, where he is more or less embraced the kind of woods deity, the naiad or whatever, the forest spirit on the side of the
Yeah.
basin in the church.
Mhm.
Like he that is his face at that point. So there is something
Yeah.
supernatural happening here. You don't quite know what it is, and I don't think you're
Yeah.
really supposed to.
That's what I got, especially when we see him put the little thingy, the little leaf on his head, and I was like, that looks familiar. I was
Mhm.
like, he's starting to look like the thing in the church.
And the next
Oh
time you see
shoot.
him, he's got like a few more. He's got like some twigs
Yeah.
sticking out of his back. Like he's not fully done the transformation yet. But
Yeah.
then the last time you see him, he is fully embraced
Yeah.
that.
All right.
Is it time?
It's time for the vicar and for the whole rebirth.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. I mean, if there's a 1-for-1 representation, obviously the vicar is the institutional trauma, particularly perpetuated by the church. That hit me over the head. I mean, that seemed maybe the most blatant of the imagery in this movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. There was no confusion there.
It's that initial conversation where the two of them are talking about, and she's honestly trying to explain her situation and process, do something to help process some of the trauma that she has been experiencing. She was literally like, the scene before, she's in the church screaming in agony as she relives the death of her husband. And we see the stigmata elements from his fall, the broken ankle, the tear from mid arm all the way up to his hand, that both of those recur later during the rebirth sequence, which I'm sure we'll talk about here shortly. And he responds in that very white male Christian kind of way of, what did you do to drive him to it? Like, clearly,
Yep.
this was not something that he did on his own. Clearly, you did something to make this happen. Big damn oof there. Like, I set my jaw when he said that. And he says that in the trailer. Like, that's a trailer moment. I knew that was coming. And even so, I kind of set my jaw, because that's the kind of harmful damage that, like you said, you and I, if we haven't experienced this in the church, we've seen it in the church just by virtue of our background and by virtue of our faith traditions.
I think about all the times that women come forward and be like, I was abused or I was raped or whatever, and they'd be like, what were you wearing? Where were you at?
Let's put this back on you somehow.
Like, were you drunk? Were you whatever it may be? And he hadn't even said that yet, and then like later on we do kind of see him blame her for like the sexual lust as well, but like from that moment he blames her and then he grabs her thigh, and it's like
he does that simultaneously pretty much. Like, I think he grabs her thigh first and then asks that question, but he does it while he is rather inappropriately touching her, quite frankly.
I mean, it represents how so many men like don't believe women or they blame women, but they still like want to take advantage of them.
It's incredibly gross, and honestly, his final scene is, I would say, the grosser of the two. The scene in the bathroom is that's the one that turned my stomach, and maybe one of the more disturbing elements of the movie is the scene in which she is confronted or haunted, you might say, by his presence, ultimately, which is, it's really disgusting, where he basically says, I have these thoughts, and these thoughts are sinful, but they're not my fault. They're your fault. You did this to me. And it's that idea that women are responsible for men's sexual desires, that men have no control over these things. We're just mindless beasts, and we have no control over the fact that, you know, we don't choose to look at women with lust in our hearts. It just happens. And so therefore women need to just, you know, be really mindful of our plight and just step up and like take one for the team, for your brothers in Christ, if you would. I don't understand that logic or that reasoning, because it removes all accountability and personal responsibility on the part of the men. And, you know, again, you hear stories and you experience things within the church. And as someone who is as involved in the church as I am, I can't think of moments when I might have perpetuated that, but there's always a fear in my heart that I may have.
Yeah.
And so I'm always I mourn and I grieve for anyone that I may have come in contact with and misinterpreted or misconstrued or misconveyed something like that in my ignorance, quite frankly. I know that's not an excuse, and I don't mean for it to sound like one, but
Yeah.
it happens, and I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm really not. But men find themselves taking part in these perpetual cycles until they
Mhm.
make the decision to break them.
Yeah.
That's why they're cycles of abuse, because they keep happening and people keep doing it because it's accepted,
Yeah.
right?
I feel that because women also perpetuate this, which sucks.
Mm.
I would have hard discussions like with family members or with friends or whatever. And I had some family that was like not Christian or more like left leaning or whatever. And we would get into discussions. And I remember saying, like, well, I don't go out and party and I don't dress immodestly. So I've never really felt that. So, like, maybe there is some truth behind that, even though no one should ever be harmed. But I remember perpetuating that because I was so deep in, like, the church. And I legitimately thought whenever, teachers and stuff, like, would say, or, youth leaders or whatever it may be, would say, like, well, men and women are different. Men are visual, da 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 da. Like, men can't control themselves. I remember believing that because they would say, like, oh, well, science says, and then they wouldn't say the science.
Right. And here's the issue then is you say men can't control themselves, but then you also say not all men, and those are two very
Yeah,
contradictory statements. You can't have both of those things in balance with one another. It's one or the other.
exactly.
You can't say both.
Exactly. And now that I'm kind of, on the outside of that environment and I've been like learning more and kind of seeing how some of those things were like super damaging, I'm not only seeing how it was so damaging for women, but how it is for men, because that's like not fair, because it's saying that men are like animals, and they're not. Men can figure that out if they're told that they could,
And if
but
they
men
want
are,
to.
yeah, but men are constantly told, like, by, I mean, it's not only religious organizations, but like I feel like I see it most in that, and that's what I'm most familiar with, so that's what I'll speak on.
Sure.
But I remember being in youth group, and it wasn't only damaging for me to hear like women cover up, like men can't control themselves, but you're telling 13, 14, 15-year-old boys that they can't be friends with girls because they can't control themselves, or it's teaching boys that they can't respect women, which is a shame because I think they can if they're taught that and they learn how to break that. I think they totally could.
Yeah. I mean, and again, these cycles of abuse, these cycles of trauma that we perpetuate, they harm. They are damaging. They're it's abuse is ultimately what it is. It doesn't matter, what the intention behind the abuse is. It's abuse, and it needs to be recognized for what it is.
And we go into the rebirth.
Let's talk about the rebirth. Let me ask you this, Katie, if I may.
Yeah.
How do you feel about body horror?
Well, it makes me cringe a little bit, but it's not the worst thing. Like, I can pretty much watch most things. I'll be honest. With my upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
I would rather watch that than watch a sex scene.
Child. Anyway, so
I did have to ease the tension while watching that scene. I had to make jokes. This might get edited out. Because, like, at one point, the rebirth happens through the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And
The
I was
feet
like,
are coming up out of Jeffrey's mouth. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, damn. What that mouth do? I just had to keep on, or like when it came out of his back, I was like,
Right.
damn, he's got that bussy, that back. I had to make those jokes because it was It was uncomfortable, and I think it was very interesting imagery, especially with each like rebirth, like each character showed different emotions and stuff.
Right.
So it's terrifying, but it's cool.
It is. And I mean, for all the shots you get of Rory Kinnear's penis through the part of this movie, in the last 10 minutes, you see a lot of Rory Kinnear's vagina in all of the places where he has apparently grown them. Like, because you're right, at one point it's between his shoulder blades, at a couple of points it's, you know, where it's supposed to be. I mean, anatomically speaking, where it's supposed to be. Like, it is wild. And again, this is the part where I start like gripping my head going, wait, what am I even watching at this point? Because the nature man gives birth to Samuel, gives birth to the vicar, gives birth to Jeffrey, gives birth to James, is kind of the progression that we see. And that's the moment I think the idea of the cycles of oppression and the cycles of abuse kind of clicked for me, is when I'm watching these men literally being given birth to, and the harm that they've caused literally trying to force itself onto her before giving birth to another one. Like, in it kind of the oppressive nature, like it's nonstop, it's always going. The imagery was so disturbing. Like, I just spent the first few months of the year going through the work of David Cronenberg, who is like the king of body horror. And even Cronenberg, and all of his oddity, still didn't manage to reach the heights of disturbing body horror that Garland manages to do in the last 7 minutes of this movie somehow.
Yeah, you know it's bad when I have to start making pussy jokes.
I mean, that was the point where I was just doing that. I was, by the way, the only person in the theater when I went and saw this. So it was I had my own private screening of Alex Garland's Men that I spent only like $8.75 for, because I went and saw a matinee. So I'm at the back of the theater, and I'm just like holding my head in my hands, like just shaking my head going, what is even happening? Like, I could not process what was going on in front of me. It's one of these movies that you really need to kind of sit with and mull over. And I think the more you're able to engage with it, I think the more powerful and interesting it becomes.
And then the ending of that scene, when it's just her and James like sitting on the couch, and she's like, what do you want? Like, she's just so spent. You can see that she's just done. And he's like, I just want you to love me. And it goes back to the selfishness. Like, he's just, I mean, this thing has just done all of this damage, just backed her into a corner, like literally. He still just wants more. He's like,
it's never enough.
It's never ending, it's never enough. And even though he's just like beat the shit out of her in a lot of ways, like,
yeah,
it's still just like, well, now I want you to love me. It's like, oh my god.
And he says that right after drawing attention to the stigmata, like drawing attention to the fact that his arm is split, his ankle is broken, and he's kind of tottering towards her, and he says, you've done this to me. Like, look at me, look what you've done to me. Essentially, I think it's something to that effect is what he says. And she just sits down on the couch, you're right, emotionally exhausted. What do you want from me? Your love. And she just says, yeah. Just kind of in this way that lets you know everything and nothing all at the same time. Like, it's such a powerful line reading and such a really poignant moment. And I think the very next scene, because you immediately cut to the title, and then there's this kind of mid-credits, actually it's a pre-credit scene because it comes before the credits, but after the title, where her friend arrives finally and surveys the damage and sees her just sitting on the steps, just smiling.
I loved that ending because with some of these things, like, you don't know if you have a super reliable narrator. And that ending confirms that we do, because the friend sees everything, like the gore, the blood, the car, and it, diminishes that we have an unreliable narrator who's a woman. She's not hysterical. This is real.
This happened. Yeah,
she's experienced this. But seeing her friend at the end, it made me appreciate her friend the whole time, because her friend throughout the whole movie is like insisting, like, hey, it's not that's not right. That's not good.
Mm-hmm.
But her friend also respects the boundary that Harper set
Right.
and doesn't come out, but she does come eventually when she needs her. So
Mm-hmm.
that was beautiful to see.
It's almost a Get Out style ending
Yeah.
where, because the original ending of Get Out, he is arrested, he is
Mm-hmm.
taken to prison. In the theatrical ending, his friend shows up and kind of saves the day and drives off saying, I told you not to go in that house. Like it's a
Yeah.
very kind of Get Out kind of ending, because at the end of the day, she's out of the house. Her friend,
Mm-hmm.
who is always kind of like, well, what are we going to do? Like, no, we're going to, he comes and is there for her now in
Mm-hmm.
this moment to commiserate or whatever. And it's a nice moment. It's good to see all of the things that she had been saying validated, because again, we're
Mm-hmm.
not given any indication. Is this all playing out in her mind? Is this all real? Is this, and we see at the end, this is some kind of supernatural presence. There is something insidious at the heart of men, is essentially kind of what we're getting at. And it perpetuated itself all over that little cottage.
It's such a good movie.
It's good. Here's the thing. Alex Garland, good filmmaker.
Yeah.
Ex Machina is like a borderline masterpiece, if not a full-blown masterpiece. Annihilation, really good. And Men, also really good. I've not seen all of Devs yet, but I liked what I have seen of Devs. So
Yeah. I hadn't seen any of his stuff.
Oh, so
And
you had no
then-
idea what you were getting yourself into.
No idea. And last night I did watch Ex Machina for the first time, and I was so impressed. I was like, I cannot believe this is his directional debut.
Mm-hmm.
This is insane. So I do love getting to witness all of the new movies coming out. I feel like it's challenging people. It's kind of fun to see a little bit of the pushback, because I feel like if it wasn't getting pushback, then it wouldn't be challenging. But yeah, good movie.
Agreed.
I think I rated it 4 out of 5 stars on
Same.
Letterboxd.
Yep.
That's what I
4 out of 5 for me
So-
as well.
I think that's all I gotta say about it.
Yeah.
It's good.
First of all, thank you so much for letting me suggest this. I this was kind of a far out idea. I was just like, I don't know if this is what you, but I'm planning on seeing it. So
Yeah.
thank you for coming on this journey. And even after I was like, do I want to talk about this in public? Because oh my gosh, am I the right person to be talking about this movie? First of all, and I'm still not entirely sure that I am. But I mean, what is my perspective? But one that's not seen everywhere, right? But I was interested to talk to you and kind of get your perspective on it. So this has been a really interesting conversation in that regard, at least. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of it.
Yeah, of course. I think it is really important for people who have privilege not to like teach about how, like there is discrimination or harm happening, but I think it is important to hear someone who does have privilege like acknowledge that and say like, oh, there needs to be changes, because a lot of people don't listen to the ones that are being, hurt. They'll listen to someone who's like them. So I do think it's cool. I was happy to have you on here. I've looked up to you for a really long time, so it's cool to get to discuss movies. It's good stuff, and I'd love to have you back.
Anytime, seriously, anytime. I'm happy to do it. I love to talk about movies. This is the kind of movie I don't get to talk about on Disenfranchised, because we talk about movies that are intended to kick off franchises, and that's not this. So
Yeah.
any chance I get to talk about a movie that I won't have to cover on the podcast one day, I am always happy and excited to do that.
I never know how to end my videos. Alright, so if you guys liked listening to this video as much as we had fun like talking about it, make sure that you give it a thumbs up, and make sure that you check out all the links down below. I'll have the social media down there that I'm never active on. I'll have links to the podcast. But yeah, that's it. I hope that you all have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.